I'm going to try and facilitate a conversation around security, cyber, AI, and some of the things that are going on in this respect, how it applies to our industry. The experts are sat here, though, so I've got some notes to help as a bit of a handrail to the discussion, to hopefully try and get useful insights from the esteemed panelists here. Before we kick off, though, what I'll do is just give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves, so everyone understands your background, and then we'll try and have a bit of a conversation to extract some interesting aspects around cyber threats, security, continue a little bit with the resilience theme, and hopefully get some insights into some of the challenges that we've got and where we're going. So, Sergio, over to you.
So, hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sergio Encabo, manager of INTEGRASYS for Benelux and north of Europe. I'm here also with Howard, our representative in INTEGRASYS here in UK, in our office here. We, INTEGRASYS, we do RF communication software systems, and we are very focused in transec security of the communications between those anti-jamming systems and also post-quantum encryption and post-quantum blockchain protection for the communication. My background is IT and telecommunication engineer. I've been working for STANAC, for example, for NATO standards, for the D-Link 16 in Eurofighter, and in ADS, now it's Airbus, but also in cybersecurity in the bank industry in Luxembourg, and now in INTEGRASYS.
Cool. Great.
Thank you.
Ulpia.
Yes, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. You know me from yesterday. I will not use this hat today. I will use my Roman Space Agency hat today. When I started working like about 10, 12 years ago, I started with a study for the International Academy of Astronautics on space as critical infrastructure. So we have been studying this in Romania with an interdisciplinary group of experts. And since about 3 years ago, I also collaborate with the National Institute for Research and Development in Informatics in Romania, where we try, by now on a theoretical level, to see how we can develop this cybersecurity for space, particularly with respect to SSA, SSD.
Thank you. Jessie.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessie Hamill-Stewart, and I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Bath and University of Bristol, where I look at cybersecurity in space from both a more kind of technical angle and then also a more strategic angle as well. When I'm not doing my PhD, I'm also, as mentioned, the program lead on the CySpace Connected Capability Network, which is a 2-year program funded by Satellite Applications Catapult to bring together communities in space domain awareness and cybersecurity across the UK in order to essentially boost the UK infrastructure's space resilience.
Dave.
I'm David Gibbons. I'm the CEO/Director General of Atheras Analytics. We use artificial intelligence to do outage prediction of your satellite network and the mission critical users of internet. I've got a long history in the space industry, and yes, that's me.
All right, good. Well, I'll set the scene a little bit for the conversation. I think as we realise from the other conversations that have happened and what we see going on around the industry, we're at a sort of profound inflection point, I think. There are so many different technologies, infrastructures, and elements to what we do and need coming together at the moment. It's quite an incredible time with that combination of what we're seeing in the LEO, the GEO, MEO market, but also I think how critical satellite communications infrastructure is becoming to critical to delivering services that form part of government's critical national infrastructure. Everything we do supports energy, banking, other elements of finance, as you all know, Sergio, and mission critical stuff to governments through MODs and other sort of security apparatus they have. So it's really becoming quite critical, I think, in terms of underpinning economies, but also, governments being able to exercise the sort of influence they want through defence organisations and that sort of thing. So I think along with that criticality that we're seeing, means that we're going to get attacked, means that people are looking for ways in to exploit the systems that we're delivering. And as we start to integrate all of these different networks, not just space-based networks, but start to integrate with 5G and 6G and other services and have extensive supply chains and now start to apply AI onto it, the attack surface is just growing and growing and growing all the time. And I think one of the things we've talked about today with threat is obviously kind of the traditional red threat. But I think from Dave's perspective, and to be able to bring what you do into the conversation, I think the other threats we need to think about are things like the environmental threat. What is the sun going to do to our ability to communicate and cause disruptions and those sorts of things, which is an area you're interested in terms of space weather, terrestrial weather, and how AI can help us mitigate those sorts of threats and risks as well. So with that sort of backdrop, we'll try and draw on your expertise to look at some of the challenges around that. And I'm particularly interested to perhaps start with Jessie, and a wider question to everybody, in terms of what do we see at the moment as the trending threats within the sort of architectures and technologies that we're using within the space industry at the moment?
Trending threats? That's a good question. It's a nice one to start off at, because it kind of, think about an overview of the threats posed to space right now. I mean, the first thing that I think about when I consider cybersecurity of satellite ground infrastructure is the fact that it's a lot more physically accessible than a lot of the other segments. And so you want to worry about it because a lot of the trends or the threats that we're seeing against other critical systems also are posed to satellite ground infrastructure. And that's something that I often say when I talk to audiences who are non-space, because they don't realize how kind of the full breadth of threats that space is actually exposed to via the ground. If we draw upon some of the things that you've just mentioned, we can dive into the AI discussion. There's always been a level of automation in space. Of course, a lot of automation has been used in various ways, but actually, if you look at how AI is being used now, it's transforming, what we can do to secure space in many ways. Processing a much larger amount of data, doing the job of people, that might take 6 months for people to do manually, doing it very quickly with an AI algorithm. But it's also worth considering that even though it transforms processes, increases automation, makes things more efficient, it also introduces additional kind of vulnerabilities. And what I enjoy thinking about on a regular basis is how new technology is very exciting, but it also poses its own kind of set of threats and worries and concerns.
Yeah, kind of interested to touch on the vulnerabilities bit, because we see a threat, we try to mitigate it, we implement things like encryption or particular waveforms, and we make something harder, and then I suppose threat actors will look for the next weakest part in the chain. I mean, what do you see as some of the key vulnerabilities across the industry, that need protecting? Is it the supply chain? Is it the waveforms? Oh, I suppose there's a bit of everything really, but where do you think there needs to be some focus on, given the threats that we're facing at the moment? Perhaps Sergio.
Yes. Well, here I see different threats. So there is the natural environment threats, and then there is the intentional threats. So good examples, the one you just mentioned regarding supply chain. So in any moment, anything that we are putting in the infrastructure could be altered in the software. Like some months ago, the random software or any other that could alter the software of our hardware device. So we have to secure also that, not just itself the communication with encryption, or as they say before, post-quantum encryption, but also something that secure that the integrity of the software of the hardware device that they're using still remains there. So also blockchain, for example, is a good capability on that. So other threats are, as mentioned by Barry before, in the UHF band, for example, is very vulnerable for jamming attacks. So we are also working on that part. And then also, of course, there is the SSA, Space Situational Awareness, that can monitor where all the satellites are, which can help to see an overview of any threats that there is currently going on. So this is the aspects and the different threats that are beside the ones that it was commented before.
Yeah, yeah. And I think as well, one of the things I've noted is what we're seeing in terms of grey zone warfare and the development of those sorts of things. And also, I suppose, given the geopolitical environment, the risks from protest groups and things like that. We've seen examples where a protest group cut open the roof of a facility that made parts for the F-35 up in the Wirral and sprayed a fire extinguisher inside, which has taken that facility out for a year. But that could easily have been a component of a ground segment somewhere or part of the supply chain that somebody's identified. And so, it's going beyond just your traditional state actors and your state-sponsored activist groups and your lone hackers and that sort of thing into a kind of wider, a wider threat group, I think. What I was wondering about, though, in terms of protection and from perhaps a policy perspective, maybe, Ulpia, you might have some insight into this, is there more that needs to be done in terms of regulation and policy to help protect things that form part of critical national infrastructure? If you look at what's going on in the world at the moment, we've got Jaguar Land Rover, on their knees with a cyber attack at the moment. We've had the Co-op, Marks and Spencer's recently affected. Look further back in the NHS with the ransomware attack. We hear very little about banking systems being attacked, and I'm just wondering whether there's a different level of regulation that needs to be implemented so that there are additional protections, particularly in the industry that we're looking at here, because it's so critical to underpinning the economy and elements of the economy.
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's really important what you have mentioned. From my perspective only, just last week I have been to Sydney to the International Astronautical Congress, and we have presented together with the team a paper where we try to take the some critical elements from the cyber security policy to bring it into the space security policy and the other way around. And really, the research is still at the very beginning, but we couldn't find many points of inflection. We couldn't find many convergence, although there has been work done in both areas. And so I would say, just as a very general answer, that there is a lot of work to be done, not starting, perhaps some other people started already, but still a lot of work to be done to manage somehow for all this domain to actually connect to one another. One other thing I wanted to mention is that space became, for in military terms, an operational domain, right? But it's quite different from air, land, maritime, because actually space is integrating everything together, so it has to be addressed differently. And I don't think currently we actually know how to address it differently. And in addition to that, we also have, as you mentioned, the dependency, or not the vulnerability given by state actors, the dependency on particular states as well, which is quite important, for instance, because you mentioned the SST. At the Romanian Space Agency, we also have this operational center for space events and tracking, where we use all sort of methods and softwares and whatever. But we are relying 99% on the databases that we receive from the United States, for instance. We don't have our database.
Yes.
So then, of course, then there is the question, to what extent this dependency is also giving us a huge vulnerability, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Comes back to a point about operational independence, I suppose, in that respect. being able to sustain things yourselves. But I mean, with like I say, the infrastructure developing so rapidly and more touch points being developed between space and ground infrastructure and other terrestrial networks, all of that becomes so complex to manage. How are you seeing the role of AI develop to give us the tools that we need to look at so many network elements, concurrently that perhaps humans can't? A lot of people are talking about AI at the moment, but I'm just wondering what, from your views, how do you see that evolving within the industry?
Oh, for me?
Perhaps,
So,
maybe.
well, anyone.
So
I can also add, but please.
What we want to say.
Yeah, AI, I know it's the new thing, but we should be looking at AI as an aid, a tool, something that we can work with. And if we go back and we talk about every software development we've had similar kind of concerns about cybersecurity and et cetera. So I see AI as the same kind of thing. AI in itself will not become malicious. It's the people behind the use of AI will be the malicious threat. Mm-hmm. So the technology in itself is not the danger. It's the human beings that implement the technology and what their intent is. That is the cause of the danger. So we need to look at the human threat and the human part of the whole development from a cybersecurity point of view, which was the same 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when we were putting in all the different computer systems and networks and network management, etc. Going back to telecoms, same thing. So it's always the human element that causes the problem.
Yeah. Sergio, you had a point as well.
No, I just wanted to add, I agree with him, but also I think that humans should be in the loop, because AI is to help the process, to automate the things and to speed up in general everything, but I should be a little bit cautious yet, step by step. For example, we are using AI for monitoring and detects threats and interference and so on. But anyways, it's a still going process. So AI is here. It will remain here. It will help more. But I think that mainly for military and secure use, also to have a human in the loop, it will be suggestible.
Yeah, yeah. And Jessie, through your work, I was just wondering if there's anything you can add to that, but also, are you seeing evidence of how AI is being used to create attack mechanisms into networks and systems, and also what you see as the limitations of the use of AI in the defence of systems as well?
Well, thank you for that question. I would build upon what we've just heard and kind of indicate that, for me, the AI and how it's being used in space now, especially in defence contexts and such, is kind of part of a wider trend in which the space ecosystem is opening up to the commercial sector, which we've seen happen over the last 10, 15 years quite dramatically. And as the sector becomes more open and you can use tools such as AI, which are quite commonly available in order to maybe access information about space systems, or you essentially, in my mind, it kind of opens it up to move away from this area of security by obscurity and move towards this time at which space is vulnerable to lots and lots of threats. One of the ways in which AI can help, I mean, I'm sure if everyone, well, anyone who's familiar with cybersecurity in this room will be familiar with the concept of AI helping people write very convincing phishing emails. And this has been picked up over a number of years now, and that's just one way in which actually it kind of emphasizes your point of how important humans are and human security is, even when you're looking at the security of very technical systems. But we're also seeing AI be used to create malicious code. It can, it may not be initially designed to help attackers, but attackers can find ways for it to help them. And we're seeing, and there's always this concern, isn't there, that however much the defense aspects, of AI, we're using AI to transform detection of attacks. It can, process all of this data in order to identify trends and how better you can secure the system. attackers are also using it in a similar way, and you could be 2 steps behind them because they could have already thought of this. The other thing to mention, the last thing I'll mention, I promise, is that there's always this concern with AI, if we become too dependent on it, that we miss little things that humans do as attackers because they are still human. Because AI is good for overall trends, but less good for things like edge cases, which are kind of peculiarities in the data. So AI will be very helpful in telling you that, for example, in the disaster recovery context, it'll be very helpful in telling you that a certain animal is in a certain area that you think it should be, or that it's slowly moving over to a different area. But then what if one of the sensors breaks? Will AI pick up on that? It's kind of hard to know at this point. So it's really important with AI, when you're using it for defense, to keep the data that you're kind of feeding your algorithm up to date. And that's again, not a challenge for now. It's been a challenge for a really long time.
Mm.
Just to build on that, I think it's really important because we have various actors at various levels. I just want to connect this with whatever we have been discussing yesterday about the transparency and the need for communication at all possible levels and between all actors, so that we make sure that whatever happens is actually, to a certain extent, under our control.
Yeah. I think that sort of transparency and sharing is a sort of a challenging thing in the cyber world, isn't it? Because although perhaps, I don't know if we've got anyone from Viasat in the audience, but Viasat, I think, have done a good job in terms of responding to the issues they had a few years ago. But the challenge is, how much do you share about cyber vulnerabilities you've discovered because you've been attacked or hacked or responded to something with the wider industry and the wider cohort, so that we all up our game, we all become cognizant of a particular weakness or a threat and put the right patches in place. I think that's perhaps a hard thing for some people to do, and perhaps made even more complicated, as AI comes along. How do we connect the different AI systems together so they all collectively learn at the same pace, rather than leaving somebody behind that then becomes the target, the weak link? Is that something that needs regulation or policies over, or is it just something that industry is going to have to develop themselves so that they aren't the odd ones out?
This is very interesting. I mean, of course, we need regulation, but the question is how. And I think, this is the main question for everything: how to regulate such a thing. For instance, not about regulation, but about practice, really. In Bucharest, at this National Institute for Research and Development in Informatics, we take students and we train them to be white hackers, and then we use them for that. But it's just a very small part of the big puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I suppose the other element here is going back to sort of the role of Atheras, Dave, and what you're doing. You're using AI to understand things like weather patterns and improve network, or I suppose ensure that network performance isn't degraded by changes in the environment, and exploiting AI in that respect to develop resilience. And I suppose, Sergio, you can do the same in terms of looking at spectrum interference in the environment as well, to be able to switch things around. So how are you seeing things develop in that respect, Dave?
So I think what we're achieving, what we're trying to do is develop the infrastructure that's going to allow us, to have the future world where everything is integrated, and that we do have autonomous vehicles that we can trust, that we can have, let's say, the systems in place that allow us to have a lifestyle that means we don't have to drive the car, we don't have to worry about going to the shops and doing all these kind of things. We can have our pizzas delivered by drone, if you want to put it that way. And from my point of view, it's not going to be a weather outage because we've already predicted what's going to go and happen. But we could have and I'm maybe being very simplistic there, but that's how I'm trying to get the message across to people, that we're going to use AI to allow us to have an integrated world that's going to allow us to have that future autonomous vehicle, autonomous delivery vessels, shipping, whatever we want to do. And that's where we say, I know it's a step away from defence, which is something that can be a problem, but that's the kind of world that we're striving for. So,
Yeah.
I guess that's where one of the challenges with regulation comes, in that it's often seen as something that kind of stifles innovation, especially if you compare what the UK is doing versus other countries. Some countries might perhaps regulate their industry in different ways, which allows for more innovation is something that I've kind of heard recently. But I think that also a lot of those examples there, they're not necessarily people delivering pizza autonomously. They might not necessarily consider themselves part of the space ecosystem, even though they are. And so it's really hard, kind of drawing upon your point here, really, for companies to even identify the right regulation for them at the moment. What regulation applies to me? Should I be where along the space supply chain am I, and therefore should space regulations apply to me, or just cyber regulations? Is it enough to just be following NCSC's cyber essentials, or do I need to do more? That question is hard. It's hard for anyone to answer that, let alone a startup trying to innovate.
What he sees, we talk about a space ecosystem, and space is becoming more ubiquitous everywhere. So space will be part of the global ecosystem. It'll just be one more element of it. And it's what I talk about, the integrated world, where you mentioned pizza delivery. What has that got to do with satellite technology? However, you need satellite technology if you're going to deliver your pizza to some remote area. So that's the integrated world. So we're going to move away from saying space ecosystem and being the be-all and end-all. It's going to move more towards it is the ecosystem that we're all part of.
Yeah. Pia.
But then, there are obviously different levels within, let's say, a sovereign territory, but we also have different sort of forms of regulation between groups of states, right? We have like-minded states and not so like-minded states. And then the question, to what extent space, for instance, cyber or outer space, are really fitting into these boundaries that we consider. For instance, look at the EU space law, which is being developed right now as we speak. They have a draft, but there is a big distinction there between the military assets and the civilian ones. And the question is, how do they not interfere, but how do really they complement one another, how to regulate that. And I think this is a very important question overall, like how do we make sure that the dual-use items, the dual-use technologies are getting regulated in an efficient, sustainable, ethical manner throughout the globe.
Yeah.
Yes, because at the same time, it will apply to both cases for civil and military, and maybe they are different, but to put AI on all this and to have huge control over that is a big threat. That's also from my point of view. So, in that case, regulation should be very in detail.
I was just thinking, going off a slight tangent, one of the things I've often noted, and I'll be interested to see your views on this, is sometimes I think the traditional cyber world, the people who are looking at threats and responses to those threats, stop doing their thing when you get to the RF domain. And they're very interested in networks and the ones and noughts and all the stuff that goes with cybersecurity. But then when you start to talk about jamming or interference, their interest suddenly starts to kind of drop off a little bit. And I'm just wondering whether sort of the definition around cyber should be a little bit more expansive. And maybe this is where the role of AI can come in, because it can look across so many different architectures concurrently. And look at the traditional issues that we do in the network domain and those sorts of threats, but also integrate information that's coming from the RF domain as well and start to correlate things, which gets over traditional boundaries that perhaps I've observed. I don't know what what have you guys seen in terms of your traditional cyber specialists understanding what's going on in the RF domain, and do they kind of suddenly stop when it gets to that point?
In my opinion, I think it's inside of the domain. So cybersecurity, jamming, and interference, the RF link, is part also of cyber attacks. Maybe mostly the people does not realize of that, but it's clean your communication. So it does not allow you to listen to the transmission. So it's a direct attack. As well as it could be protection of the channel in the physical layer, also could be protection in the encryption layer, and also, as before mentioned, in the supply chain. So this is all together. And mentioning what was commented a bit before regarding AI on this, AI is helping us a lot to characterize different types of threats, of interference in the UHF channel, in any other band, and to apply the best solution for it. And yes, it's a adding and supporting system which help us to speed up in the process in that regard. So
yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'll put you on the spot slightly. I've got a question.
Yeah.
And have you observed anything through the use of AI that you wouldn't have been able to capture perhaps a few years ago? Have you got any examples where you can...
Yes, we have too much.
Yeah.
Indeed, we have too much. So we have to go, the human brain have to go step by step, but the AI sometimes is spread around and give us too much information that we need to process. So, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think one of the other things that sort of came about in earlier discussions we had about the application of AI is maintaining that sort of human control in the loop. I know, Jessie, you've got some views on that, but also going a little bit further about how organisations understand what their needs and requirements are for AI in terms of cybersecurity and the training that needs to go on so that it's implemented correctly. And have you, Sergio, I suppose, got any lessons from that? There seems to be a rush to AI at the moment, but do people really understand what it means and what benefit it can provide in terms of security across different networks and environments?
Yes, well, talking about that, of course, we have information that is not useful from them that we have to watch out and we have to control, like everything. Also, in the SSA, whenever you identify something, you have to really check if that is something real, it's not something that is invented from the AI. So, of course, there is need of a human in the loop in that sense, but beside of these cases, there are also very positive cases that give us information about new threats, new type of different interference, which is not just detecting and characterizing this, they are also helping us or giving steps or tips on how to apply any solution. So in that sense, yes, it's a positive, but it's like a sword. It has two faces, which we have to be careful. That's, that's my point of view.
Okay. And Dave, I was just thinking from the sorts of applications that you're looking at, have you noticed a sort of step change in the resilience you're able to provide with your systems that couldn't have been achieved by people in the loop previously?
So we see a step change in that our business is the step change. So the ability to actually do an outage prediction wasn't there before. You would have taken weather data and you would have interpreted it and said, that's the weather forecast. Whereas we're a very, very accurate prediction to say, this is when it's going to happen at this moment in time. This is how long it's going to go for. And you need to switch 15 minutes beforehand to be able to do it. So it's a very precise application of AI that we put into place, and it allows the operators to have their availability 24/7 without any outage problems worldwide. So it's part of the what I talked about before, the future ecosystem, and that it's allowing us to have 24/7 access. Yeah. So that's where we see the step change. AI is the step change.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Cool. Fine. I'm just thinking sort of to move on a little bit, going into your sort of area, Jessie, and maybe back to Ulpia as well, is what do you think the industry could most usefully start to focus on in terms of current cyber threats and issues, in terms of cross-industry collaboration, going back to things like policy development, or new technologies? Where do you see the sort of the most value being had from focus in the industry?
I would just add, and let the others also mention something. I think sovereignty and collaboration within the national sovereignty is something really needed. We need to depend on ourselves and develop our own tools. In this regard, it's very important, and our own protection mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
Just to build upon that, I think considering how many people are part of operating satellite systems and the wider space ecosystem and the wider digital ecosystem related to that, it's really important that people speak to one another. So one of those things, just to pick up on what you mentioned earlier, is kind of sharing vulnerabilities and sharing data. So I've been lucky enough to go around the country to different parts of the UK and run workshops related to space domain awareness and cybersecurity this summer. And in those workshops, people have spoken about kind of issues that they've encountered, or kind of, let's say, things that they would like to see more of between the space sector, cyber sector, and other sectors too. And one of the things that keeps on coming up is information sharing. From an academic perspective, it's really important to have access to attack data in order to be able to analyze it and think about future attacks and develop mitigations. But also for industry, it's important to have that full round view of, is this attack that's happening to me? Is this vulnerability that's being exploited? Is it unique to me? Or is it something that is a trend across multiple industries as well? And by sharing information about attacks and also kind of mitigations, hopefully, there could be more resilience overall. But one of the things that maybe is missing right now, or is growing right now, I'm not sure, in order to facilitate this, is trust. It's really important for people to trust one another in order to feel like they can share that information. And these little workshops, they're on a very small scale, only 30, 40 people come to them. But actually there is a lot of trust in the room. And I've seen kind of firsthand how that kind of deliberation, that collaboration, as soon as you're comfortable with someone, as soon as you've met someone in person, you're speaking to them, you develop that familiarity, and then you're more willing to share that information that could be helpful. And then we're seeing mechanisms like the Space ISAC, if you're aware of that, which kind of facilitates commercial, membership-driven kind of data threat sharing in terms of physical threats and cyber threats to space. And this is one of the mechanisms that's emerging perhaps in response to more threats to space, more concerns about disruptions to infrastructure. And again, it has a US cell, Australia, Japan, UK, but something that's really important to it, something that will really motivate people to sign up to it, is having that trust. And one of the ways in which they overcome that is they vet each kind of organization that wants to be part of it. And there are some countries which are not part of the Space ISAC. The aim is to create that trust globally, because of course space and other digital systems are global. They're not just it's not just UK, it's global, and you have to develop sovereignty maybe within the UK, but sovereignty within a region really, because you can't do everything yourself in space.
Yeah. I suppose to a degree, Ulpia, go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to complement this with the example of ATLAC, Action Team on Lunar Activities Consultation. Within the UN, we were looking at how we can prevent, for instance, harmful interference in the cislunar space, as cislunar, where really the main actors are the commercial ones. And of course, we are at the UN, so member states are talking most of the time. So we made this action team, which basically means that the member states are being informed by the commercial actors or whatever other actors, academia, experts in the domain, what they should really take into account when they think of what sort of mechanism for consultations on lunar activities should be developed in the future. And so it's again about communication, transparency, information sharing. It's just an add-on to your example.
Yeah. Well, I was just sort of reflecting as you were talking, Jessie, and as well, Ulpia, is a self-forming community enough, really? There are, you say trust, and there's examples across the industry already where people share information. You've got the Space Data Association, so people sharing information about capabilities and things already. But given the threats we've got, and going back to the criticality of the contribution that the space industry plays to banking and logistics and defence and other governmental aspects and underpinning the economy, not just for SATCOM, but it could be ground stations supporting GNSS services or ISR surveillance type capabilities and Earth observation. That is, the data we get from things like Earth observation is critical to, understanding global warming and really big things like that. So it is allowing the industry to kind of self-form networks of trust and sharing information enough, or does it need more from a government perspective to say, here are some standards you've got to conform to because you are so critical to everything that goes on in the economy now. We've got to take it up a level. Do you think we need more of that?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, there are several lines of action here. Of course, there is a need for some sort of upper level consensus, and that comes definitely from member states of the UN really coming together and saying we have a problem here, we need to communicate on that, which actually happens in AtLive, because there are some states which are not communicating with respect to their landing sites or their lunar operations in general. So there is a need for that, and obviously it's important. But there is also this other side where the community comes together around particular challenges and form groups, as you said, and there is also this bottom-up approach that informs member states, and so the two are supposed to be complementary.
All right. Jessie, have you got another point to make?
Just to say that, in addition to that, I've lost my thought now. What was the question?
We were talking about trusts
That's right.
and whether a self-forming kind of networks of trust are enough, or there needs
That's
to be more
right.
government
I remember now.
regulation.
I remember what I was going to say. Thank you. The stakes are too high, I think, to ignore security and to not implement it fully. I think there's really, security will always play a role in very digital systems which are reliant on technology. And as we become more and more dependent on space, you mentioned very cool, areas of exploration, but actually you're quite right. Globally, the world, even, you look to the Pacific region, we're all becoming more dependent on space. And that makes it really important to secure it. And actually security has always been something that you have to kind of enforce in some way, in a way that doesn't stifle innovation, but also does ensure that the systems that we're becoming reliant on can continue to function. Because we've seen what happens if there's an attack against M&S. That's one thing. Oh no, we can't go and make an online order or collect an online order. But then what happens if we see a disruption to some of those, to positioning or timing? We see airports close that are fully dependent on GPS for their, in Finland for their navigation. As we become more dependent on space, it becomes really important not just to ensure that everyone is being secure, but also that we're also developing resilience. And so when attacks do inevitably happen, there are alternatives to space as well that we can rely on in order to continue living our nice, convenient digital lives.
Yeah, cool.
I just want to add something, may I can?
Yep.
Just to try to wrap it or put everything together. So I think it's is needed, or is very important to have this database of information about threats, RF threats, but also Earth observation, to be able to understand how it is. And for example, some weeks ago, the European Commissioner von der Leyen have some attacks, RF attacks, GNSS attacks, going to Bulgaria, if I'm not wrong. So that are the case of things that we can monitor, and to put in this database in general, that also affects, as you say, to the bank system and finance system. In general, everything that now goes, not just internet by cable, but also with SATCOM information. The thing is that, and also there is some side issue, that there is some information of this threat that actually you cannot share, because it's also confidential from the military point of view. But of course, I mean, everything that can be shared, should be done. We are part of the members of the Space SAC. We are happy with that, and well, we will continue, and we hope this grows up. So that's.
Right. Cool. Well, on that sort of strategic point, I think I can smell lunch. So we'll call it a day there in terms of the discussion.
Hello.
But is there a question or two from the audience?
What I'd like to say is we'll take a couple of questions. Anybody who's booked into the workshop downstairs, if you'd like to wander down, but we will take some questions and we'll go from there. But it was fantastic, by the way.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Frane Miloš, Infinity Technologies. So, first of all, very nice panel. You covered more or less most of the things from the title, including waveforms, information sharing, and so very, very interesting topics. But one thing that is in the title and I didn't hear anything about is cloud. And I mean, we are witnessing a trend of virtualizing gateways in SATCOM, but also in Earth observation. There is a lot of contracts being done between the satellite operators and the cloud providers. So maybe a question to all of you: what do you see as the main benefits, but then also the main threats from cybersecurity aspects, and especially for, let's say, governmental or military systems?
So I believe that as we get more and more data, as we use more and more information, we can't store it locally. You can't just process it and store it. It's got to go into data centers, and data centers are provided by the cloud, or the cloud data center provide the cloud. So I just think it's part of the infrastructure that we're building. It's going to allow that integrated world, that artificial intelligence world, and the fact that we are going to be using data, information, and as I've just said, we can't store it locally, so it's got to go into the cloud. It's just another tool. Yep.
Yeah, I think as well that there's a growing dependency on cloud computing. It's not just you've got the problem of being able to store it, but the more information you can have, the more you can process, the more little bits of data you can pull out. But to do that, the more computing power you need, and the more and the world of compute is becoming distributed. You know, things like blockchain technology, where you've got processors all over the world contributing towards solving little problems. That's the way that industry is going, and that's something that we're kind of entwined with, because that's what they offer. But then you've got to understand what are the criticalities behind that. You know, a lot of equities are invested in NVIDIA at the moment. You know, what happens if that goes under, or if there's war in Taiwan and the whole supply chain for that gets disrupted? It feeds through into different bits of industry, doesn't it? And it'll affect our ability to exploit cloud computing services, I think, if that sort of thing happens. So, yeah.
From my point of view, and I think this is something that I already talked with Fran, so there is a standard that is called DIFI, which digitalize the analog signal into digital in order to, after all these packets could be stored in the cloud and analyzed with artificial intelligence, everything automatically. So this is the sense that this scenario starts to be reality, and well, let's see where it ends.
Yeah.
So yesterday I referred about content replacement. And probably people thought it was content replacement due to a cyber attack on ground infrastructure. It was a content replacement on an RF signal. Very smart. As I said yesterday, I never saw this in 41 years of my career. I came up with an idea which was oblige the industry to put into the HPA, which is transmitting, an identification number which is changing. Satellite is synchronized with that number, and I'm asking the engineers to solve the problem, not me. And then allowing only the transmission to go through. But then we need the regulatory to help us, because the countries which adhere to this can operate on, let's say, Western satellites, whichever satellites we want. So we need to modify the rules of engagement. And the countries which don't want to adopt this new standard, we will know that if there's a problem, we can identify that's a carrier with no ID number, and that's it. We know it's coming from that country, so we have a finger pointing. It took us 48 hours to understand what was happening. 48 hours with no artificial intelligence, sorry. I don't know, what do you think about such an option, or is the industry already looking at something new and better?
Yeah. I think off the top of my head, it sounds like a good discussion point for the SIG group, I think, downstairs.
But may I can also add something, because, for example, we are also working on something that is called carrier ID. So each carrier, you can recognize an identification pattern with it, and that is an alternative to securize. But there is also a lot of systems that actually you cannot put that in place. So you need to have a lot of alternatives. It's not just one, there is not one silver bullet, let's say, but it's an alternative, yes.
I was thinking of MAC address for RF.
Yes, like that could be.
We'll take one more question, and then I think everybody wants lunch.
Thank you, Jake Saunders, AB Research. I mean, there's been some talk about cyber AI. I think some presentation about quantum safe communications. I think there's some guidance recommendations by 2035. Entities should be, quantum safe. I mean, I hear this word recommendation. It's a lovely word, but shouldn't it be compliance, requirements, penalties, legal restrictions if you don't do this, penalties? I mean, I think we'll see these technologies are likely to shift in phases. We're sort of seeing, I think, right now up to, I think, sort of 1,000 quantum sort of qubits, but, there's a Nobel Prize for quantum tunneling. Things will suddenly shift, I think. I mean, do you feel there should be an acceleration of quantum safe type communication, especially for communication links like gateways and such like?
I mean, to pick up on the first part of that question related to kind of sort of enforcing regulations, I think that it is important to find a way to ensure that people are following the rules in order to ensure that they have secure infrastructure. And I think that one of the challenges, as was kind of drawn upon with the earlier question, is that where space infrastructure is so globally distributed, even in, you've got nice policies like the EU space law, which does actually enforce some of this. But then even though the EU space law kind of depicts that it will apply to some suppliers down the supply chain, to what extent can they actually kind of implement that remains kind of a bit of a question there. And I think that it's really important as we move towards, the quantum era, even now as we are as dependent on space as we are now, it's really important that we find a way to enforce security. Enforce sounds really strong, but kind of, in the UK, something that works quite well is the Civil Aviation Authority certifies components before they, go up to orbit. That's good, but we have to ensure that that security is reaching all of the suppliers as well, because as we've seen with recent attacks, M&S, and subsequent ones, a lot of the times the attackers come through the supply chain. So it's all very well securing this ground station, but then if this supplier of this software which goes into the ground station or up to space isn't secure, then you're still letting people in.
I'm not sure if I will be able to answer your question, but at least regarding post-quantum encryption, I can mention, or post-quantum blockchain, I can mention that I wish I could enforce that, but will depend of the people who own the system and that put the capabilities on on that, but for example, it's a real threat because there is right now Chinese satellites getting approached to other satellites, recording the ref in order that in the future we'll be able to de-encrypt the current encryption. You know that with the SOR algorithm it's possible, depends on the qubits of the machine, to decrypt or break the encryption algorithms for the communications or the data transmissions. So it's a real threat. Actually, we don't know if maybe they are already able to do that. So I think that to update this is very suggestible, but I don't know if enforce somebody we can do it, but we have the tools out there, so we are trying to update the tools in that regard.
Right. I think we're going to call it a day there. Thank you very much again.